You know, it's funny how sometimes the very people who claim to love you the most can be the ones to slowly, painstakingly, erode every ounce of your self-worth. If you've ever felt like your family's love came with a suffocating, invisible leash, or if every achievement you celebrated was met with a subtle dismissal, then buckle up, because today, I'm going to tell you about the time my own flesh and blood tried to declare me too unstable to inherit what was rightfully mine. And trust me, you won't believe what happened next. So, go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button, because this is a story about reclaiming your power when everyone else wants to keep you small. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The air in my parents' sprawling, impossibly ornate living room thick with the scent of old money, polished mahogany, and barely suppressed disdain. The crystal chandelier, a monstrous testament to generations of legal prowess and the wealth it generated, cast sharp, unforgiving glints on the faces of my family. My mother, Eleanor, sat ramrod straight on the velvet settee, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression a careful mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Opposite her, my father, Richard, leaned forward in his armchair, a man carved from granite and legal precedent, his gaze unblinking and dissecting. And then there was my older brother, Robert, lounging with a casual arrogance that always grated on my nerves, a smirk playing on his lips as if he already knew the outcome of this morbid little family tribunal. We were there, ostensibly, to discuss the future of Sterling & Sterling, the prestigious law firm my grandfather, George Sterling, had founded with nothing but a sharp mind and an even sharper wit. Grandfather George, now frail and fading in his upstairs bedroom, was the patriarch, the true visionary. He'd built an empire, and for all his gruffness, he had always, in his own distant way, believed in me. He saw the fire, the intellect, the relentless drive that my parents and Robert seemed determined to extinguish. "Sarah," my father began, his voice a low, measured rumble that always felt more like a verdict than a conversation. "We're here to talk about the firm's succession, with grandfather's health declining." He trailed off, a silent punctuation that hung heavy in the air. We all knew what it meant. George Sterling wouldn't be with us much longer, and the vast legal empire he built needed a clear line of succession. I braced myself. I'd been working at Sterling & Sterling for 15 years, since graduating top of my class from Harvard Law. I'd single-handedly built our firm's new tech law division from the ground up, bringing in some of the biggest tech giants as clients. My billable hours consistently topped everyone else's, including Robert's. On paper, I was the obvious choice, the most qualified, the most dedicated. But in my family's eyes, qualifications meant nothing if your emotional fortitude was constantly under scrutiny. "We believe," my mother interjected, her voice softer than my father's, but no less sharp, "that given your recent challenges, it would be unwise to place the full burden of the firm on your shoulders. Not right now. Anyway." "Recent challenges," I repeated, my voice betraying a slight tremor, a weakness I instantly cursed myself for. This was their game. Bait me. Watch me react, then use my reaction as proof. "What challenges are we referring to?" "Mother," Robert finally spoke, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Come on, sis. We're just looking out for you. Remember that little episode last year, when you had to take time off after the breakup with Mark? You were pretty fragile." My blood ran cold. The breakup with Mark had been brutal. Yes, he'd cheated, publicly humiliated me, and I'd taken a week off to collect myself. A week. Most people would have taken a month. But in their narrative, it wasn't a week of self-care, it was an episode. A sign of my inherent instability. They'd twisted it, gaslit me into believing that my perfectly normal human reaction to heartbreak was proof of a fundamental flaw. Fragile, I laughed, a short, humorless sound. I was heartbroken. Robert, anyone would be. I took a week off, came back, and closed the Nexus deal that same month, adding $10 million to the firm's revenue. Does that sound fragile to you? My father sighed, a theatrical exhalation that conveyed his deep disappointment. "Sarah, we understand you work hard. We appreciate your contributions. But leadership requires a certain temperament, an unwavering calm. Even under immense pressure, we've always worried about your emotional volatility. Emotional volatility. That was their favorite phrase. Anytime I expressed anger, frustration, or even sadness, it was immediately pathologized. If I cried, I was hysterical. If I argued passionately for a case, I was aggressive. If I was quiet, I was moody. There was no winning. It was a cage of their own making, where every emotional response I had, every nuance of my personality, was scrutinized through the lens of their preconceived notion of my instability. I thought back to my childhood, to countless dinners where my ideas were gently, yet firmly, dismissed, while Robert's most outlandish schemes were applauded. I remembered wanting to pursue a minor in art history in college, only for my mother to declare it impractical and a distraction from your true path. My true path being, of course, the one they had meticulously laid out for me: law, sterling, and eventually, a silent, compliant partner. My own desires, my own passions, were always secondary, always suspect. They weren't just questioning my stability, they were questioning my very right to exist as an independent, emotional human being. We believe, my mother continued, her gaze sweeping over me with that same curated concern, that Robert, with his steady hand and even keel, is better suited to take the reins at this critical juncture. Robert, whose steady hand consisted of delegating all his difficult cases to junior associates, showing up late to meetings, and schmoozing clients on the golf course while I toiled away, actually doing the work. Robert, who had never once shown an ounce of the intellectual curiosity or dedication required to truly lead a firm like Sterling and Sterling. He was simply male, older, and, in their twisted logic, inherently more stable because he kept his emotions locked away behind a facade of casual indifference. Robert, I finally managed, my voice a whisper of disbelief. Are you serious? I've been building this firm's future for years. Robert can barely manage his own caseload without my help. My father slammed his hand lightly on the armrest of his chair, the sound sharp in the quiet room. That's enough, Sarah. Your tone is precisely what we are discussing, this emotional outburst. It's exactly what concerns us. See, there it was, the trap. My justified anger, my frustration at their blatant injustice, was immediately reframed as proof of my instability. It was a classic gaslighting technique, perfected over decades. They'd create a situation designed to provoke a reaction, then use that reaction to justify their control. Don't you see what you're doing? I pleaded, my voice rising despite my desperate attempts to keep it level. You're manufacturing a reason to sideline me. You've been doing it my whole life every time I show an emotion. Every time I dare to be anything less than a perfectly composed, unfeeling robot. It's used against me. Robert scoffed. Oh, here we go, the victim narrative. Look, Sarah, we just want what's best for the firm, and for you. Maybe a nice long vacation, get your head straight. A vacation, a polite way of saying, go away, we're taking over. They wanted me out of the picture, silenced, diminished. They wanted me to accept my fate as the fragile daughter who needed to be protected from herself, and from the responsibility of leadership. A wave of nausea washed over me. All those years, all those sacrifices, all that hard work, for what to be told I wasn't good enough, not because of my skills or my intellect, but because I dared to possess a full range of human emotions, because I wasn't a robot like them. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, and I fought them back with every fiber of my being. Crying now would only confirm their narrative. But the pain, the profound sense of betrayal, was almost unbearable. This wasn't just about the firm. It was about my entire identity, meticulously dismantled by the very people who were supposed to uplift me. I have contributed more to this firm than both of you combined in the last 5 years, I stated, my voice low and trembling with suppressed fury. I built the tech law division from scratch. I brought in clients you couldn't dream of. And you want to hand it over to Robert because I had a bad breakup, because I felt something. My father leaned back, a smug expression settling on his face. It's not just the breakup, Sarah, it's a pattern. The way you get fixated on cases, the way you argue with senior partners when you disagree. It's all a bit much. It's called passion, Father R. I retorted, throwing my hands up in exasperation. It's called fighting for my clients. It's called having conviction traits that a good lawyer, let alone a good CEO, needs. But they weren't listening. They never truly listened. They heard what they wanted to hear, filtering everything through their predetermined narrative of my instability. My mother picked up a porcelain figurine from the side table, meticulously dusting it with her thumb, her silence more damning than any words. It was a clear sign that the conversation, for them, was over. The decision had been made. I stood there, feeling utterly defeated, surrounded by the opulent trappings of a life I had worked tirelessly to earn, only to be deemed unworthy by the very family who had pushed me towards it. The air felt heavy, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to smash that ridiculous chandelier, to unleash all the rage and frustration that had been building inside me for decades. But I didn't. I just stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, watching them, truly seeing them for the first time. They weren't concerned parents. They were strategists, playing a long game of control and manipulation. And I was their pawn. As I walked out of that living room, a cold dread settled in my stomach. They had won this round. They had planted the seeds of doubt, not just in their own minds, but, more dangerously, in mine, for years. I'd been battling this narrative internally, wondering if, maybe, just maybe, they were right. Maybe I was too emotional, too sensitive, too unstable for the cutthroat world of corporate law, let alone to run a multi-million-dollar firm. The constant undermining had chipped away at my confidence, leaving me vulnerable and unsure of my own perceptions. But as I stumbled into the cool evening air, away from the stifling atmosphere of their house, a tiny defiant spark ignited within me. They think I'm unstable. They think they can just push me aside. A quiet fury began to simmer, slow and steady, replacing the initial sting of betrayal. This wasn't just about inheriting a business. It was about my identity, my autonomy, my very right to define myself. They had called my sanity into question. And in doing so, they had unwittingly opened a door they never knew existed. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. This was no longer just a family squabble over inheritance. This was a battle for my soul, a fight to prove to myself, more than to them, that I was not broken, I was not unstable, and I was certainly not to be underestimated. Little did they know, their very accusation was about to become the catalyst for their own undoing. Leaving that house, the family home that had always felt more like a beautifully gilded cage, felt like shedding a layer of suffocating expectation. But the immediate aftermath wasn't liberation. It was a deep, aching plunge into self-doubt. Their words, sharp and precise from years of practice, had found their mark. Unstable, fragile, emotional volatility. These weren't just accusations. They were echoes of a narrative I'd been hearing, subtly and overtly, for my entire life. Have you ever had someone constantly tell you who you are, until you start to believe it yourself? Even when every fiber of your being screams otherwise, that's where I was. I locked myself away in my apartment for days. The pristine modern lines of my minimalist living space, offering no comfort against the chaos raging in my mind. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah Sterling, the hotshot tech lawyer who could dissect complex contracts in her sleep and stand toe-to-toe with the most ruthless corporate sharks, was crumbling because my family questioned my emotional state. I replayed every episode they'd ever referenced. The time I cried for days after my childhood dog died. And my mother told me to pull myself together. Sarah, it's just a dog. The time I fiercely debated a political topic at Thanksgiving dinner, only for my father to cut me off, saying, Sarah, your passion can be overwhelming. You upset your Aunt Martha. Even the time I quit a grueling internship because I was experiencing severe burnout, and they framed it as me not being able to handle pressure. Each memory was a tiny pinprick, contributing to the slow bleed of my confidence. I tried to work, but my focus was shattered. I stared at legal briefs, the words blurring into an indecipherable mess. How could I advise clients on complex corporate mergers if my own mind was a battlefield of self-recrimination? The firm, my life's work, felt tainted. Every achievement now seemed to whisper, was it all just a facade? Am I truly a ticking time bomb of emotions, ready to explode and ruin everything? One evening, staring blankly at my laptop, a notification popped up. It was an email from Anya Sharma, a brilliant, no-nonsense former colleague from law school. Anya had left corporate law years ago to become a therapist, specializing in family dynamics and trauma. We hadn't spoken in ages, but her name felt like a lifeline in that moment. Without thinking, I typed out a frantic, rambling email, pouring out years of suppressed frustration, the recent confrontation, the gaslighting, the profound sense of being utterly broken. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Her response came the next morning, "Sarah, call me, now." The call with Anya was unlike any conversation I'd ever had with my family. There was no judgment, no dismissal, just a calm, steady presence. I talked for what felt like hours, recounting not just the recent confrontation, but a lifetime of subtle manipulations, dismissals, and emotional invalidation. Anya listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with a gentle question or a clarifying statement. "Sarah," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "What you're describing isn't instability. It's a perfectly normal, human reaction to a deeply dysfunctional family system. They've weaponized your emotions against you, gaslighted you into questioning your own reality, and created a narrative that serves their need for control. Your episodes were you being a human being with feelings, reacting to genuine pain or injustice. Their problem isn't your volatility, it's their inability to tolerate anything that challenges their carefully constructed world where they dictate the terms." Her words were a balm to my raw, wounded soul. It was like a window had opened in a suffocating room. Someone, finally, saw me, truly saw what I had been enduring. "But why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why do they do it?" "Control, my dear," Anya explained gently. "And fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of change. Fear that your success, your independence, might expose their own insecurities or failings by diminishing you. They elevate themselves and maintain the status quo. It's a classic narcissistic dynamic. Sarah, they can't handle a strong, capable woman who doesn't fit into their prescribed box." Over the next few weeks, Anya became my anchor. We had regular sessions where she helped me untangle decades of emotional manipulation. She taught me about gaslighting, about narcissistic family patterns, and about the crucial importance of setting boundaries. She helped me see that my emotional responses were not flaws, but strengths, evidence of my empathy, my passion, my humanity. "Your sensitivity," she told me, "is a superpower, Sarah, not a weakness. It's how you connect with clients, how you understand nuances in a case. Don't let them turn it into a weapon against you." During this period of intense introspection, I felt a strange pull towards my grandfather, George Sterling. He was ailing, mostly lucid but fading fast. He was the one who had always encouraged my intellectual pursuits, the one who saw my ambition as something to nurture, not suppress. He had taught me chess as a child, instilling in me a love for strategy and foresight. I started visiting him more often, not just out of duty, but out of a desperate need to connect with someone who had, perhaps, understood me. One afternoon, during one of these visits, Grandfather George, his voice raspy, beckoned me closer. "Sarah," he whispered. His eyes, though clouded with age, still held a spark of his old cunning. "There are always rules, but a good lawyer knows when to look beyond the obvious ones. Sometimes. The most powerful truths are buried in plain sight." He drifted off then, his words cryptic. But they stuck with me. Buried in plain sight. A few days later, while my parents and Robert were busy with what they called pre-succession planning, which I now understood as how to cut Sarah out, I found myself in Grandfather George's sprawling, dusty study. It was a place I hadn't spent much time in since childhood, filled with towering bookshelves, antique maps, and the rich scent of old leather and pipe tobacco. He'd always kept his most important documents here, away from the prying eyes of my overly conventional parents. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just a sense of connection, perhaps a forgotten photo, a letter, But as I ran my hand along a shelf of ancient legal tomes, my fingers brushed against a loose panel behind a particularly weighty volume on corporate governance. My heart pounded. It wasn't a secret door, just a small, hidden compartment inside. Nestled amongst some old war medals and faded photographs was a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. It was Grandfather George's personal journal, detailing his early days building the firm, and tucked inside, between 2 pages discussing the firm's original partnership agreements, was a brittle, parchment-like document. Separate from the main journal, it was dated 1962 typewritten, and bore the heavy seal of the firm. It was an addendum to the original partnership agreement, signed by all the founding partners, including George Sterling. My eyes scanned the elegant, looping script. The document detailed various clauses, most of them standard boilerplate, but then a specific section caught my eye, bolded in faded ink, almost as if it had been highlighted decades ago. Clause 7B, Succession and Leadership Aptitude. I held my breath. This felt important. The clause went on to outline the standard line of succession, but then it detailed a fascinating, almost archaic provision. Should any primary heir or designated successor to the senior leadership of Sterling and Sterling, P.C., be declared by the unanimous consensus of the remaining active partners, acting in good faith, to be of unsound mind, emotionally unstable, or otherwise demonstrably unfit to lead due to severe mental or psychological incapacitation. Then, and only then, shall the next eligible heir in the direct line of succession, irrespective of their current standing or previous designation, immediately assume the role of Chief Executive Officer. Furthermore, should the aforementioned declaration of unsoundness, instability, or incapacitation be subsequently proven, through independent and objective psychiatric evaluation conducted by a mutually agreed-upon board of 3 certified professionals, to be without merit, founded instead upon malicious intent, personal bias, or an attempt to unjustly remove the designated heir from their rightful position, then the unjustly accused heir shall, with immediate effect, assume the full powers and responsibilities of the Chief Executive Officer, and any and all partners who participated in the malicious declaration shall forfeit their partnership shares and be immediately divested of their roles within the firm. I read it again and again. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from a thrilling, electrifying surge of realization. It was a sanity clause, an old-fashioned, almost quaint provision, likely put in place by my cunning grandfather and his original partners to protect the firm from a truly deranged successor. But the critical part, the part that made my heart pound with a fierce, defiant rhythm, was the second half. Should the aforementioned declaration be subsequently proven to be without merit, founded instead upon malicious intent, personal bias, or an attempt to unjustly remove the designated heir from their rightful position, then the unjustly accused heir shall immediately assume the full powers and responsibilities of the Chief Executive Officer, and the kicker, and any and all partners who participated in the malicious declaration shall forfeit their partnership shares and be immediately divested of their roles within the firm. My parents and Robert had just, in that living room, unanimously declared me unstable, unfit, too emotional. They had, by their own words, triggered the first part of this clause, and given Anya's insights and my own growing certainty, I knew their declaration was rooted in malice, personal bias, and a blatant attempt to unjustly remove me. It was brilliant, a legal booby trap, set by Grandfather George, decades ago, waiting for someone foolish enough to step into it, and my family, in their arrogant certainty, had just done exactly that. A cold, exhilarating clarity washed over me, all those years of being gaslighted, of having my emotions weaponized, of being told I was too much or not enough. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. They had not only questioned my sanity, they had documented it. They had articulated their unanimous consensus, and in doing so, they had inadvertently handed me the keys to the kingdom. The world outside Grandfather's study seemed to hum with new possibilities. The weight that had crushed me for days began to lift, replaced by a surge of defiant energy. Anya's words echoed in my mind, "Your sensitivity is a superpower." And now, their attempt to exploit that sensitivity had given me the ultimate weapon. I carefully folded the old addendum and tucked it into my bag. This wasn't just a document, it was a testament to my grandfather's foresight. A silent vindication of every tear I'd ever shed, every moment of self-doubt I'd ever endured. He had anticipated people like my parents, people who would try to leverage perceived emotional weaknesses for their own gain. And he had built in a failsafe. This wasn't about revenge, not truly. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my narrative, my worth, and my rightful place. They thought they had backed me into a corner, convinced I was too unstable to fight back. They were about to learn that my instability was, in fact, my greatest strength, the very thing that would allow me to see the world differently, to find the hidden clauses, and to wield them with the precision of a seasoned warrior. The game had just changed, and they didn't even know they were playing. The sanity clause from Grandfather George's addendum felt like a hidden spring, suddenly bubbling up in the arid landscape of my life. The moment I tucked that brittle document into my bag, a profound shift occurred within me. The pervasive doubt, the crippling insecurity that had been my constant companions, began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming an inheritance. It was about reclaiming myself. But empowerment, I quickly learned, isn't a switch you simply flip. It's a strategic, often grueling, process. Anya's words echoed in my mind. They've weaponized your emotions. Now, you need to weaponize their assumptions. My family believed I was emotionally volatile, easily manipulated, and too fragile to handle the complexities of the firm. Good, let them believe it. It would be my greatest advantage. My first move was to consult with external legal counsel. I couldn't risk letting anyone within Sterling and Sterling, even those I thought I could trust, get wind of my discovery. My family had eyes and ears everywhere. Through a discreet referral from Anya, I found Eleanor Vance, a formidable corporate litigator known for her discretion and her ruthless effectiveness. Eleanor, with her sharp suits and even sharper mind, listened intently as I laid out the whole convoluted saga, my family's history of gaslighting, the recent confrontation, and the astonishing sanity clause I'd unearthed. She examined the document with a jeweler's precision, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Sarah," she said, finally looking up, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "This is a masterstroke. Your grandfather was a genius. This clause is ironclad, provided we can prove malicious intent on their part in declaring you unstable." "They practically wrote a confession in that living room," I responded, a grim smile playing on my lips. "Their entire history with me has been about undermining my emotional state to control me. I have decades of anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence is a start, but we need more," Eleanor stated pragmatically. "We need concrete, documented instances where they attempted to invalidate you, discredit your judgment, or explicitly question your mental fitness in a professional or official capacity. Anything that builds a pattern of behavior leading up to their unanimous consensus." This sent me on a quiet, determined mission. I began meticulously cataloging every email, every text message, every meeting minute where my contributions were subtly diminished, my ideas dismissed as emotional, or my perfectly rational reactions were branded as overreactions. I dug through old performance reviews, noting the suspiciously vague comments about temperament despite stellar results. I found an email from my mother suggesting a therapist for me after I had passionately advocated for a particularly aggressive litigation strategy that ultimately won the firm a massive payout. Each piece was a thread, weaving together a tapestry of their manipulation. Meanwhile, my family, blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb I now carried, continued their subtle campaign. They believed I was retreating, licking my wounds. Robert started dropping by my office, ostensibly to check in, but really to subtly assert his growing authority. "Hey, sis," he'd say, leaning against my doorframe, a casual, condescending smirk on his face. "Just wanted to see how you're doing. Heard you missed the partner's lunch. Everything okay? Don't want you getting too stressed. His words, meant to sound concerned, were laced with veiled accusations. Stress, in their lexicon, was synonymous with instability. I'm fine, Robert, I'd reply, my voice carefully neutral. Just swamped with the new blockchain client. You know, the one I brought in. I'd make sure to emphasize my contributions, not out of boastfulness, but as a subtle reminder of my undeniable value. My parents, too, stepped up their game. My mother would call daily, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. Sarah, dear, your father and I were just discussing. Perhaps it's time you considered a sabbatical, a long cruise. Maybe get away from the stresses of the firm. We'd be happy to arrange everything. A sabbatical, a cruise, a polite way of saying, we want you gone. They were trying to gently push me out, to make me voluntarily step aside, but I knew their game. Every suggestion was a test. Another attempt to chip away at my resolve and to gather evidence of my supposed fragility. I played along, subtly. That's very kind, Mother, I'd say, feigning a sigh. I do feel a bit overwhelmed sometimes. This whole succession talk, it's a lot. I'd let a hint of vulnerability creep into my voice, enough to make them feel smug and secure in their assessment of me. But internally, I was meticulously observing their reactions, logging their words, building my case. One evening, my mother even suggested a family therapy session. Just to clear the air, Sarah, she'd said, her voice cloying. You know, talk through some of your feelings about the firm. We just want you to be healthy. I almost laughed. Family therapy with them, it would be a gaslighting masterclass. But then, an idea sparked. You know, Mother, I said, putting on my most hesitant voice. That might actually be a good idea. I do have a lot on my mind. Perhaps if we could all just process this together. She visibly brightened. This was exactly what they wanted. A forum where they could collectively reinforce their narrative of my instability and subtly coerce me into admitting I wasn't fit for leadership. What she didn't know was that I planned to use that session not to process, but to collect more evidence. I spoke to Eleanor Vance about it. This could be a goldmine, Sarah, she'd said, her eyes gleaming. If you can get them to explicitly state their concerns about your mental state in a recorded, or even well-documented, setting, it strengthens our case immensely. But be careful. They are skilled manipulators. I walked into that family therapy session armed not with a desire for reconciliation, but with a mental checklist. The therapist, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Evans, seemed genuinely earnest. My parents and Robert, however, were on a mission. Dr. Evans, my mother began, her voice brimming with feigned concern, we're simply worried about Sarah. She's always been sensitive, and now, with the weight of the firm, we just don't think she's emotionally robust enough to handle the stress of leadership. She tends to spiral. Robert nodded sagely. Yeah, she gets really emotional. Remember the Mark situation. She just shut down. A leader can't do that. My father, ever the strategist, chimed in. We've tried to be supportive, Dr. Evans, but her reactions are often disproportionate. It indicates a certain fragility that we simply can't ignore when the future of Sterling and Sterling is at stake. I sat quietly, observing them, letting them dig their own graves. I offered minimal resistance. A quiet nod here, a hesitant, I understand your concerns there. I wanted them to overplay their hand, to articulate their accusations clearly and unequivocally. And they did. They spoke of my tendency towards emotional outbursts, my over-identification with cases, my need for extensive time off, that single week after Mark, and in my difficulty accepting constructive criticism read disagreeing with them. So, your primary concern about Sarah's leadership, Dr. Evans gently summarized, turning to my parents, is fundamentally about her perceived emotional and psychological stability. Precisely, my father said, leaning forward, an air of finality in his tone. We just don't believe she has the mental fortitude required for the CEO position. We believe it would be detrimental to the firm, and to Sarah herself, to place her in such a high-pressure role given her predisposition to emotional challenges, my mother added, her voice laced with a subtle pity that made my skin crawl. My heart hammered in my chest. They had said it, plain as day. unambiguously. They had explicitly and unanimously declared me unstable and unfit due to perceived mental incapacitation. The words were etched into my memory, ready to be deployed. After the session, I immediately debriefed with Eleanor. They walked right into it, I told her, my voice barely containing my excitement. They specifically stated their concerns were about my emotional and psychological stability, and that it rendered me unfit for CEO. They linked it to the firm's future. Eleanor smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Excellent. Sarah, that's exactly what we needed. We now have documented evidence of their unanimous consensus regarding your unsound mind or emotional instability, as per Clause 7b. The second half of the clause is now in play. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. I continued to project an image of someone slowly, painfully coming to terms with her limitations. I occasionally confided in Robert about my anxieties, about the firm, about how overwhelming things felt. I let my mother offer me more supportive advice, feigning gratitude. I even started taking longer lunches, making sure they knew I was taking it easy. They ate it up. Robert started calling me little sis more often, patting me on the back with an air of benevolent superiority. My mother sent me self-help books and even tried to set me up with a nice, stable man who worked in accounting. Their confidence in their plans soared. They believed I was capitulating, retreating into the shell they had painstakingly built for me. This period of quiet preparation was excruciatingly difficult. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to lash out, to expose their hypocrisy, but I held back. Channeling my frustration into meticulous planning, I had to maintain the facade, however painful. To ensure their overconfidence led them directly into the trap my grandfather had set. I worked tirelessly with Eleanor, refining our strategy. We identified the 3 independent, certified professionals who would conduct the psychiatric evaluation, ensuring they were beyond reproach and utterly impartial. We prepared a comprehensive dossier of all the instances where my family had questioned my stability, highlighting the pattern of behavior and the clear malicious intent. We meticulously cross-referenced their statements from the family therapy session with the wording of Clause 7b. My emotional journey during this time was a roller coaster. There were days I felt incredibly strong, fueled by righteous anger and the clarity Anya had given me. And there were days when the old doubts crept back in, whispering their familiar poison. What if they're right? What if I really am too much? What if I fail? But then I would look at the copy of Clause 7b tucked into my planner and remember the fierce determination that had ignited in Grandfather George's study. This wasn't just for me. It was for every person who had ever been told their feelings were invalid. Their reactions, too much. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the annual Sterling and Sterling board meeting was scheduled. It was typically a formality, but this year, it was clear my family intended it to be the official handover. The public affirmation of Robert's leadership and my graceful, or not so graceful, exit. I received an email from the firm's general counsel, a man my father had personally appointed, stating that the succession plan for the CEO position would be the primary agenda item. It was time. They had laid out their chessboard, believing they had already won. They were about to make their final move, but they didn't know I had a queen hidden, waiting to deliver a devastating checkmate. The quiet preparations were over. The sand had shifted, the trap was set, and they were about to step right into it. The air in the Sterling and Sterling boardroom on the day of the annual meeting was, as always, meticulously controlled. The scent of expensive coffee mingled with a faint aroma of anxiety, a familiar blend to anyone who'd spent years navigating the treacherous currents of family power dynamics. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, their expressions a carefully calibrated mix of solemnity and barely disguised triumph. Robert was beside them, radiating an unearned confidence, his eyes occasionally flicking towards me with a patronizing pity that made my skin crawl. Around the table sat the remaining senior partners, mostly older men who had been with the firm for decades, men who understood the unwritten rules of the Sterling family hierarchy. They respected my abilities, I knew, but they also understood where the true power lay. They were ready to rubber stamp whatever my parents proposed. "Good morning, everyone," my father began, his voice resonating with his usual gravitas. "As you know, with George's declining health, the time has come to formalize the succession plan for the CEO position. It's a critical moment for Sterling and Sterling, and we must ensure the firm's future is in the most capable, and indeed, most stable hands." Here it was, the moment they would publicly declare me unfit. My heart hammered against my ribs, but strangely, I felt a profound sense of calm. This wasn't the Sarah who crumbled under their accusations. This was the Sarah who had meticulously planned, who had unearthed a secret weapon, and who was about to turn their carefully constructed narrative on its head. "We have had extensive discussions," my mother chimed in, her gaze sweeping the room. "And after careful consideration, including some very difficult personal conversations, we have come to a unanimous decision regarding the leadership. While Sarah has certainly made valuable contributions to the firm, particularly in the tech law division," she paused, a practiced gesture of acknowledgement that felt more like a concession than praise. "We, as a family, have deep concerns about her emotional fortitude and her ability to withstand the intense pressures of leading a firm of this magnitude. We believe, with regret, that she is simply not emotionally stable enough for the CEO role at this time." Robert nodded gravely, adding his 2 cents. "It's for her own good. Really, the stress would be too much. She's better suited to a less demanding role where her sensitivities can be better managed." My father then delivered the final blow. "Therefore, the partners have agreed that Robert Sterling will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, Sarah. We would like to offer you a newly created position as Head of Special Projects, with a reduced caseload and, of course, a generous sabbatical option to help you recalibrate. A Head of Special Projects, a glorified title for being sidelined, stripped of true power and influence, and a sabbatical to recalibrate. Their thinly veiled attempt to push me out of the firm entirely." The other partners around the table murmured their assent, some avoiding my gaze, others offering sympathetic but empty looks. They thought it was over. They thought they had neatly resolved the Sarah problem. I took a deep breath. This was it. "May I speak?" I asked, my voice calm, clear, and steady. Every eye in the room turned to me. Surprised by my composure, they expected tears, an outburst, anything that would confirm their narrative. My father, slightly taken aback, nodded curtly. "Briefly, Sarah, the decision has been made." "Yes," I replied, a small knowing smile touching my lips. "The decision has been made, just not the one you think." I reached into my briefcase, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the old, brittle addendum. The room watched, puzzled. Robert frowned, his casual arrogance starting to waver. "I believe," I began, holding up the document, "that before we proceed with this rather unilateral declaration, we should first refer to the foundational documents of this firm, specifically Grandfather George Sterling's original partnership agreement, and more critically, Addendum 7 dated 1962. My father's brow furrowed. "That's an old document, Sarah, irrelevant to current succession." "On the contrary, father," I countered, my voice gaining strength, "it is profoundly relevant. This addendum contains a clause, Clause 7B, Succession and Leadership Aptitude, which I believe directly addresses our current situation." I looked directly at my parents, then at Robert. It states, "Should any primary heir or designated successor to the senior leadership of Sterling and Sterling, PC, be declared by the unanimous consensus of the remaining active partners, acting in good faith, to be of unsound mind, emotionally unstable, or otherwise demonstrably unfit to lead due to severe mental or psychological incapacitation, then, and only then, shall the next eligible heir in the direct line of succession, irrespective of their current standing or previous designation, immediately assume the role of Chief Executive Officer." A nervous cough rippled through the room. My parents exchanged a glance, a flicker of unease in their eyes. Robert's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning comprehension, then alarm. They remembered this clause, or at least the gist of it. It was an old legend, a sanity clause from a bygone era, thought to be obsolete, or at best, an amusing relic. They never imagined it could be turned against them. This is exactly what you have just done, I continued, my voice unwavering. You, my parents, and Robert have just unanimously declared me emotionally unstable and unfit to lead due to severe mental or psychological incapacitation. You even detailed this in our recent family therapy session with Dr. Evans, stating it was your primary concern. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't let her. But the clause doesn't end there. It has a critical second part, one that, I suspect, you have conveniently overlooked, or perhaps never even knew existed in its full form. I paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension in the room build to a palpable hum. This was the moment. The clause continues, I announced, raising my voice slightly, and this is the crucial part furthermore. Should the aforementioned declaration of unsoundness, instability, or incapacitation be subsequently proven, through independent and objective psychiatric evaluation conducted by a mutually agreed-upon board of 3 certified professionals, to be without merit, founded instead upon malicious intent, personal bias, or an attempt to unjustly remove the designated heir from their rightful position, then the unjustly accused heir shall, with immediate effect, assume the full powers and responsibilities of the Chief Executive Officer, and any and all partners who participated in the malicious declaration shall forfeit their partnership shares and be immediately divested of their roles within the firm. The boardroom erupted. Gasps, whispers. Robert shot out of his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. That's absurd. That clause is ancient. It's boilerplate. Boilerplate with teeth. Robert, I countered, my eyes burning into his. And it carries the full legal weight of the original partnership agreement, personally signed and witnessed by Grandfather George. It has never been rescinded, amended, or superseded. It is legally binding. My father, his face pale, finally found his voice. Sarah, this is an outrageous fabrication. You're clearly unstable to even suggest such a thing. Oh, am I? Father, I challenged, a triumphant glint in my eyes. Then you just triggered the clause again. Because, as it turns out, I anticipated this. For weeks, I have been gathering evidence of your consistent attempts to undermine me, to gaslight me, to manufacture a narrative of my instability, based purely on your personal biases and your desire to control me. Every dismissed idea, every invalidated emotion, every veiled accusation, it's all meticulously documented. I pushed a thick binder across the table towards Eleanor Vance, who had been sitting quietly in the back. Observing the scene with a knowing smile, she stood and walked to the front, placing the binder on the table with a resonant thud. And, I continued, my voice ringing with newfound authority, I have already undergone the independent and objective psychiatric evaluation, as specified by the clause, not by one, but by a board of 3 highly respected, certified professionals, none of whom have any prior association with the Sterling family or firm. Their unanimous finding, which is contained in this binder, is that I am, indeed, of sound mind, emotionally stable, and perfectly fit to lead Sterling and Sterling. They found no evidence of incapacitation, only a history of emotional resilience in the face of familial manipulation. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother looked as if she'd seen a ghost, her carefully composed mask completely shattered. Robert was visibly shaking with rage and panic. My father stared at the binder, his face ashen, realizing the magnitude of the trap he had walked into. Therefore, I stated, my voice calm but laced with an undeniable steel, since their declaration of my instability has been proven to be without merit, founded upon malicious intent, and an attempt to unjustly remove me from my rightful position as the most qualified heir. Clause 7b dictates that I, Sarah Sterling, immediately assume the full powers and responsibilities of the Chief Executive Officer of Sterling and Sterling, PC. I paused, letting that sink in. Then, I delivered the final, devastating blow, and as for you, Mother, Father, and Robert, the clause is equally clear. Any and all partners who participated in the malicious declaration shall forfeit their partnership shares and be immediately divested of their roles within the firm. That includes your shares, your positions, and your ability to practice law under the Sterling and Sterling name. My mother let out a strangled cry, This is preposterous. You can't do this. Sarah, we're your family. Family, I retorted, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Doesn't gaslight, manipulate, and attempt to destroy someone's career and sense of self. Family doesn't weaponize emotions. You just tried to disinherit me based on a lie. Mother. And you used the very mechanism meant to protect the firm against instability to do it. But you failed. Miserably. Robert lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. You conniving, but you planned this. I learned from the best. Robert, I said, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. I learned from you, and from mother and father, how to play the long game, how to analyze the fine print, how to anticipate moves. Grandfather George taught me strategy, and you taught me what happens when you underestimate the person you've been trying to keep down. My father, finally regaining some semblance of control, stood up, his voice hoarse. This is an egregious misinterpretation. Sarah, we will fight this. We will tie this up in court for years. You can try, father, I said, a wave of calm empowerment washing over me. But you'll be fighting against your own signed agreement, against independent psychiatric evaluations, and against a mountain of evidence demonstrating your malicious intent. And you'll be doing it without the resources of Sterling and Sterling, because as of this moment, I am the CEO, and my first act will be to ensure the firm's assets are protected from frivolous, self-serving lawsuits. Eleanor Vance stepped forward, holding up a stack of legal documents. These are prepared injunctions to freeze any attempts to transfer assets or partnership shares, and formal notices of your immediate divestment. As per Clause 7B, they are ready to be filed. My team is waiting. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't just shock. It was the silence of utter defeat, the realization that their meticulously crafted plan had backfired spectacularly, leaving them utterly exposed and vulnerable. They had questioned my sanity, and in doing so, they had triggered the clause that made me CEO and stripped them of everything. The power dynamic in the room had shifted irrevocably. The old order had crumbled, and I, the unstable daughter, stood in its triumphant ruins. The immediate aftermath of that boardroom showdown was less a triumphant parade and more a seismic aftershock. The silence, thick and suffocating only moments before, shattered into a cacophony of panicked whispers and furious exclamations. My mother, white-faced and trembling, looked at my father with an accusation so potent it needed no words. Robert, his face a grotesque mask of fury, lunged again, but was restrained by one of the more level-headed senior partners, his eyes wide with shock. This is not over, Sarah, my father roared, his voice cracking with a raw, unfamiliar desperation. You think you can just waltz in here and strip us of everything we built this firm? We're your family. And you tried to destroy me, father, I countered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands that only I could feel. You tried to invalidate my existence, to brand me as insane so you could take what was mine. This isn't about property, it's about justice, and I assure you, it is over, for you at least. As partners of Sterling and Sterling, Eleanor Vance, a picture of calm professionalism, stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Robert Sterling, as per Clause 7B, your partnership shares are immediately forfeit. Your access to firm accounts, systems, and client information has been revoked. Security will escort you out. Any attempt to interfere with the transition will be met with full legal action, including further injunctions and potential criminal charges for obstruction of justice. The threat of criminal charges, delivered with Eleanor's chilling precision, seemed to finally penetrate their rage-filled haze. My father, the formidable patriarch, looked utterly broken. My mother began to openly weep, a sound I had rarely heard from her. Robert, however, was still spitting venom. You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll never succeed without us. You're nothing. I am the CEO of Sterling and Sterling, I stated, my gaze unwavering. And as of this moment, I am free from your toxic influence. That, Robert, is everything. Watching them being escorted out, their faces a mix of disbelief, shame, and unadulterated fury, was not as satisfying as I had imagined. There was a hollow ache in my chest, a profound sadness for the family I had always yearned for, but never truly had. This wasn't a victory dance. It was a painful severing. a necessary amputation of a diseased limb. The remaining partners looked at me with a mixture of awe and apprehension. They knew I was capable, but they also knew the firm had just been rocked to its core. Partners, I addressed them. My voice projecting authority I was only just beginning to truly feel. I understand this is a shock, but Sterling & Sterling will not falter. My first priority is stability and transparency. We will hold an all-hands meeting tomorrow morning. Every employee will be informed of the change in leadership, and I will personally address any concerns. My vision for this firm is one of meritocracy, innovation, and ethical practice. If you are committed to that vision, you have a place here. If not, the door is open. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, a grueling test of my newfound authority. I plunged into the role of CEO with a ferocity born of years of being underestimated. My first order of business was to stabilize the firm internally. I held the all-hands meeting, directly addressing the rumors and the dramatic exit of my family. I know many of you are confused, perhaps even scared, I began. Standing before hundreds of employees, my voice amplified by the PA system. What happened yesterday was a necessary, though painful, step to ensure the future integrity and ethical leadership of Sterling & Sterling. My family's attempts to undermine my leadership were not based on merit, but on personal bias and a desire for control, thanks to a foresightful clause in our founding documents. Those attempts have backfired, and I am now your CEO. I didn't shy away from the truth, but I framed it in a way that focused on the firm's stability and future. My commitment to each of you and to our clients is unwavering. We will continue to uphold the highest standards of legal excellence. We will foster an environment where talent is recognized, innovation is celebrated, and ethical conduct is paramount. This is a new chapter for Sterling & Sterling, one built on trust, respect, and fairness. The employees responded with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. Many had witnessed the subtle favoritism towards Robert, the quiet dismissal of my achievements. They knew the old guard was resistant to change. My directness, my transparency, resonated with them. I immediately began restructuring. I appointed a new general counsel, someone I trusted implicitly and who had expressed quiet support for me over the years. I implemented new performance review systems, ensuring that merit, not family connections, dictated promotions and bonuses. I reviewed every department, identifying areas of inefficiency and, more critically, areas where my family's influence had stifled progress. The pushback, as expected, came from every direction. My parents, through their own lawyers, launched a barrage of legal challenges. They claimed the sanity clause was archaic, unenforceable, and had been invoked maliciously by me. They tried to appeal to old contacts, to sway former clients. Sarah, your parents are trying to spin this as an emotional breakdown on your part, Eleanor Vance informed me one morning, looking through a stack of new filings. They're claiming you manipulated your grandfather's will, that you're unstable and vindictive. Let them, I said, a newfound calm settling over me. We have the psychiatric reports. We have the documented proof of their own declarations. We have the clause itself. Let them waste their money. Every challenge they launch only further proves their malicious intent. And that's exactly what happened. Each time they tried to invalidate my claim, they inadvertently strengthened my case. The independent psychiatric evaluation became our impenetrable shield. The court cases they initiated dissolved one by one, with judges ruling consistently in my favor. Upholding the validity of Clause 7b, the legal fees mounted for them, while the firm, under my renewed leadership, remained financially robust. Dealing with my family on a personal level was even more draining. My mother alternated between heartbroken pleas and furious accusations. How could you do this to us? Sarah, we gave you everything. You were always so ungrateful. You've destroyed this family. You destroyed it, Mother, with your control and your dismissiveness, I'd say, my voice now firm. No longer susceptible to her manipulative tears. You taught me that my worth was conditional on my obedience. You taught me to constantly doubt myself, but you also taught me to fight. Robert, fueled by a corrosive mix of entitlement and humiliation, resorted to public slander, spreading rumors about my mental breakdown in legal circles. "She's gone mad," he'd tell anyone who would listen. Completely unstable, she's ruined the firm. But his words had little impact. The legal community, while initially gossipy, quickly saw through his desperate attempts. The firm was thriving under my leadership. We were winning big cases, attracting new talent, and our financials were stronger than ever. Actions, as they say, speak louder than words. My stability was demonstrated through my results, not through their baseless accusations. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the lingering emotional residue. Decades of gaslighting don't just vanish overnight. There were moments of intense loneliness, moments when I questioned if I had gone too far, if I was truly becoming as ruthless as they were. But then Anya's voice, from our therapy sessions, would cut through the noise. Boundaries. "Sarah, this isn't ruthlessness. It's self-preservation. It's protecting your peace and your power." I started setting clear, non-negotiable boundaries with my family. They tried to visit me at the firm, demanding meetings. I refused. They sent angry emails. I forwarded them to Eleanor Vance. They even tried to enlist extended family members to pressure me into reconciliation, which was just a veiled attempt to regain control. My aunt, my mother's sister, called me one day, her voice laced with guilt-tripping sentiment. "Sarah, your mother is devastated. She cries all the time. Can't you just forgive them? They're family." "Aunt Carol," I replied calmly, "my forgiveness is not contingent on me abandoning my boundaries or sacrificing my well-being." They chose to declare me unstable. They chose to try and disinherit me, and they chose to disregard the very contract that governed this firm. They are now facing the consequences of their own actions. I am rebuilding my life, and this firm, on principles of respect and integrity. If they cannot respect those principles, then there is nothing to forgive in the way you mean it. It was an ongoing process. There was no magical fix for decades of deep-seated family dysfunction. But I was no longer a victim. I was the CEO. I was the one setting the terms. I was finally in control of my own narrative. The firm began to flourish in unexpected ways, without the stifling influence of my parents and Robert. I was free to implement bold, forward-thinking strategies. I invested heavily in technology, diversifying our client base beyond traditional corporate law. I championed diversity and inclusion, creating a culture where employees felt valued and empowered, something the old Sterling & Sterling never truly was. I found immense satisfaction in my work, a joy I hadn't realized was missing. It wasn't just about the numbers. It was about building something healthier, something truly aligned with the values I held dear. The firm was no longer just my grandfather's legacy. It was my legacy, forged in the fires of conflict and tempered by resilience. The journey was far from over. The emotional scars remained. But they were no longer gaping wounds. They were faint lines, reminders of how far I had come, of the battles I had fought and won. I had stared down the people who tried to break me, and I had emerged stronger, clearer, and undeniably, irrevocably empowered. My instability had become the very foundation of my strength. It's been 5 years since that chaotic boardroom day. 5 years since I stood up and reclaimed not just a business, but my entire life. If you had told me then, drowning in a sea of my family's gaslighting and self-doubt, that I would be here, now, truly thriving, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But here I am, and Sterling & Sterling is flourishing in ways my ancestors never even imagined. The firm is no longer just a bastion of old money and rigid tradition. It's a dynamic, forward-thinking legal powerhouse. My vision of meritocracy and innovation has transformed every aspect of the business. We've expanded our tech law division exponentially, securing partnerships with cutting-edge startups and established Silicon Valley giants alike. I've personally spearheaded initiatives to diversify our client portfolio, delving into new areas like environmental law and social justice advocacy, something the old guard would have scoffed at. Our revenue has quadrupled, and our reputation for ethical, effective legal counsel is stronger than ever. But the most profound changes haven't been in the balance sheets. They've been in the culture. I made a conscious effort to build an environment where talent is nurtured, voices are heard, and emotional intelligence is valued, not weaponized. I brought in therapists and coaches for our employees, offered flexible working arrangements, and fostered a collaborative spirit that was utterly absent under my family's reign. The firm, once a rigid hierarchy, now hums with vibrant energy and genuine respect. My relationships with my family, however, remain complex, some severed, others redefined on my terms. My parents, after their initial, furious legal battles, eventually faded into a bitter silence. They lost their partnership shares, their substantial incomes from the firm, and their social standing took a significant hit. The legal community, while initially gossipy, quickly saw the truth as my successful leadership, and their continued desperate attempts to discredit me only made them look foolish and petty. They now live a much reduced lifestyle, a consequence of their own choices. I occasionally hear whispers of their struggles, but there's no joy in it for me. It's simply the natural outcome of their actions. There's no hate, just a quiet acceptance that some relationships, no matter how deeply rooted, are fundamentally toxic and must be pruned for growth. Robert, ever the opportunist, tried to start his own small firm, but without the Sterling & Sterling name or the network he took for granted. He floundered. He occasionally sends me angry, rambling emails, full of accusations and self-pity. I filter them directly to a separate folder, reminders of the bullet I dodged. I've built an impenetrable boundary between us, one that he cannot cross. And my grandfather, George Sterling. He passed away peacefully a year after the boardroom showdown. He never fully regained his lucidity, but in his final weeks, when I visited him, I believe there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a silent nod of approval. He had seen the chaos, but he had also seen me rise. His sanity clause wasn't just a legal trap. It was a testament to his understanding of human nature, a safeguard against the very kind of insidious manipulation his own children would embody. It was his final, brilliant chess move, and I was merely the player who executed it. My personal life has blossomed too. I found peace and a deep sense of self-worth that was impossible when I was constantly battling my family's narrative. I no longer question my emotions. I embrace them. My sensitivity, the very trait they condemned, is now my superpower. It allows me to connect deeply, to empathize, to lead with a compassion that was previously seen as weakness. I've built a strong support system of friends, colleagues, and of course, Anya. Anya remains a close confidant, a brilliant mind who helped me untangle years of emotional abuse and find my own voice. She reminded me that setting boundaries isn't about being cruel, it's about self-respect. It's about drawing a line in the sand and saying, no more. My peace is non-negotiable. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt like your family was holding you back, dimming your light, or telling you that you're too much or not enough, know this: your story is not theirs to write. Your worth is not determined by their approval. The very traits they try to weaponize against you, your emotions, your sensitivity, your passion, might just be your greatest strengths. It's a long, hard journey to reclaim your narrative, to heal from the wounds inflicted by the people who were supposed to protect you. There will be moments of doubt, moments when you want to give up, moments when the old voices whisper their poison, but you are stronger than you know. You are resilient, and you are capable of building a life, a career, a legacy that is authentically, unapologetically yours. My story isn't unique. Millions of people out there are dealing with similar dynamics, fighting for their autonomy against the people who claim to love them. But I hope my journey, my messy, painful, ultimately empowering journey, can offer you a glimmer of hope. So, if you're struggling with similar family dynamics, remember, seek external validation. Find a trusted friend, a therapist, or a support group, someone who can help you see clearly when your own perspective is being clouded by manipulation. Document everything. If you're dealing with manipulative behavior, start keeping a record. Those subtle comments, those veiled accusations, they can become powerful evidence if you ever need to use them. Understand your boundaries, learn what you will and won't tolerate, and then fiercely protect those boundaries, even if it means difficult conversations or painful separations. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Your intuition is a powerful guide. Your emotions are valid. Don't let anyone tell you that your feelings are too much or a sign of weakness. They are a fundamental part of your humanity, and they can be a source of incredible strength. I used to dream of a family that saw me, truly saw me, and loved me unconditionally. That dream, in its original form, died a long time ago, but in its place, a new, more profound reality has emerged. I found the strength to unconditionally love and approve of myself, and that, my friends, is a far greater inheritance than any business could ever be. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to deal with something similar, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and share this video with anyone who might be struggling. Because every one of us deserves to stand in our own power, no matter what our family might say.